And we're back at RSAC Conference 2025, broadcasting live from the CyberRisk TV studio in Broadcast Alley, which is located in Moscone West. I'm co-host of Paul Security Weekly, Jeff Mann, and I am joined for this session with none other than HD Moore. HD being the founder and CEO of a company called Run Zero.
Thanks,
HD,
Jeff.
welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's been this is kind of fun for me because we've been running in the same circles for decades. We've never really had a chance to sit down and have a conversation before, so I'm looking forward to this. Tell us a little bit about Run Zero.
Sure thing. Run Zero came out of doing pen test work, like all great products do,
Right.
and realizing that the way that we kept breaking into these organizations was through devices they didn't even know they had. And so, if you're a company that can afford, a very expensive pen test for the boutique firm, you're going to care a lot about your security. You're going to have lots of investments in the products you know about, but the thing you don't know about, that's where people get owned, right? So the goal behind Run Zero is find all your stuff, tell you what's wrong with it, help you mitigate those exposures before you get compromised.
So you're finding vulnerabilities.
We're finding assets, vulnerabilities, networks that didn't even know about, all kinds of stuff. So we identify segmentation problems. We find vulnerabilities that are just kind of non-standard and a little weird. Like we'll look at the relative exposure between different assets. So we can tell you that if you have a network that's mostly server 2019 machines, we find a X piece in place, it'll stick out like a sore thumb. We'll say this thing is probably different from the rest of them. You should probably care about it. So a little bit of outlier analysis, a little bit of like direct exposure measurement. We also integrate with all the things so you can pull in your data from your vuln management platforms. We also do native vuln reporting. You connect your cloud, your EDR, your MDM, and then results. We can say, here are the assets in your environment. Here's ones that do not have any kind of agent, any kind of EDR, MDM agent on them whatsoever. Here's parts of your organization that have no coverage by your vuln scanner at all. And here's the vulnerabilities that we've identified that weren't actually covered by any of these other tools. To just kind of set the stage a little bit, folks who are using more of their EDR and agent-based phone scanning,
Right.
they're kind of missing the network context. They'll tell you you've got all these exposures, but not which ones are actually reachable by an attacker.
Right.
The flip side, your network scanners are saying, here's your ports, here's your services, but the network scanners have gone really far down the authenticated only part of scanning. It's so difficult to do unauthenticated vuln detection these days that if your authenticated scanning doesn't work, they tell you very little. So we're
Right.
trying to help kind of close the gap between those two perspectives, between what does unauthenticated scanning miss right now, we want to do that very well, and then what are you not getting network context-wise from your agent-based vuln detection?
It's interesting you bring it up in that context. Our listening audience, at least on Security Weekly, will know that I often bring up PCI because I'm a PCI QSA assessor. I've been doing it for 20 years, and brand new in PCI version 4 is the requirement to do authenticated scanning, and of course that came out 2022. We've had a couple years to ramp up for it, but I've been telling people ever since it came out we need to be careful of this because there's a big difference between an authenticated scan and an unauthenticated scan in terms of findings. And I went around 22, 23 talking to people I knew at Tenable, talking to people I knew at Qualys, Rapid7, and I'm like, guys, and audience knows maybe I used to work for a little while with Paul at Tenable. I knew that their agents did not look for the network-based vulnerabilities at all, and a lot of organizations I think are relying on the agent-based scan to cover the authentication portion. But I didn't know if Tenable was unique, so I went to talk to Qualys, I went to talk to Rapid7, I knew people at all those places, and they all pretty much agreed, yeah, they're all different results, and the recommendation was do both. Would you share that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, end of the day, if you've got a managed device, you should either be doing authenticated scanning or have an agent-based discovery on it because you'll get data you won't get any other way.
Right.
The challenge is half your network you can't do authenticated scan on. There's no credential you can use to enumerate a vendor-supplied virtual machine, right?
Right.
Or your NAS storage or your network device equipment. Like you can kind of sort of do credentials there. The challenge though is like if your authenticated scanner fails to enumerate a device, do you know that? Are you creating a list of that? I think PCI specifically says if you are not able to do authenticated scans of these devices, you need to note each one as an exception and describe why.
Right.
But most folks aren't really aware of that. They're not aware that if your authenticated scanner is not successful in authenticating, it's just going to give you nothing. It's going to give you a blind spot.
Right.
So we really try to help kind of identify those blind spots, and we look at things a little bit differently. So for example, we'll fingerprint all the internal devices, TLS fingerprints, SSH host keys, all these kind of cryptographic, fingerprints, if you will.
Right.
And then we'll look at the entire internet and say, are there any things on the internet that have the exact same cryptographic key? And if so, this device must be exposed to the internet because there's no other way this could occur. So kind of a neat little tricky thing there to see, like, even if we don't know anything at all about your external segment, we can find port forwards that you don't know about just by doing straight cryptographic correlation between those two sets.
Right. What I like hearing is what you're describing is very much sort of the more pen tester mindset of approaching and finding vulnerabilities, where you're actually digging in and looking for context and looking for the things that arguably the scanner can't find. I'm curious, not to belabor the PCI theme, but PCI for years has required not only vulnerability scanning, internal and external, but also penetration testing, internal and external. We could go off on a tangent on whether I've ever seen in an assessor what I would consider to be a pen test as the evidence. But where would you describe what you guys do in the spectrum between a vulnerability scan or a pen test, and really cut to the chase? Would using your tool meet either of the requirements or both?
Sure. So we would not meet the requirement for authenticated scanning, and that's
Okay.
because we do not want to. We don't do not want your password. We don't want to send your password flying around the network, right?
Yep.
I've succeeded a lot of pen tests by capturing the credentials from the scanners and using that to own all the machines. Like there's a danger in using authenticated scans too.
Sure.
And of course, because authenticated scanning only works for half the environment, you need data on the rest of it too. So our entire goal is like, how do you help you identify all those risks in machines you can't authenticate to, you can't do that type of authentication. So you have to do both, of course. I feel like where our strong point is we help you see it from a different perspective. Like we joked early on that after working on Metasploit for 15 years, that Run Zero is really just like, 1,000 different pen test techniques in a trench coat, cosplaying as asset inventory.
Right.
Because we did the most boring output with the most complicated possible way to do it. And the idea is that you can go into an environment that you have no access to. So pen testers love us because you can drop us in an environment where they have no access and we'll find everything. M&A teams love us for the same reason. They're going to an environment where the IT team may not like them very much, that they may be at risk of their job,
Right.
and we will still identify everything, figure out the risks and exposures. So we're really good at finding like those kind of like creative exposures that other folks don't. And especially with PCI, if you care about segmentation, isolating your CDE from your non-CDE, we find segmentation gaps like nothing else through super clever ways. So if you have a machine running like just Windows machine default like 135 TCP, no credentials needed whatsoever, we'll identify the secondary interface of that machine. We can tell you if it's actually on the CDE and not CDE. And if so, we know it's a pivot point. We can show it on a graph and say, go after this machine. This is the best way into the CDE from this network. So we help kind of really verify your segmentation is being correct.
Yeah, I'm hearing you and thinking this is leaning a lot more towards meeting the pen testing requirement. And as you said, if they're invoking segmentation, testing the segmentation, which in version 4 there's a lot more clarification and guidance on what that means. It's not just a port scan.
Yeah.
So that we need to talk later. If we can, I'd like to shift gears for a few minutes and maybe wax lyrical and philosophical on just the whole nature of vulnerability and vulnerability detection and vulnerability management, and sort of the state of what's going on with vulnerabilities. I forget which report I've read recently, being inundated in the weeks leading up to RSA, but there's reports out there how many vulnerabilities have been found this year versus last year, and the trend is still going up, and up, and so on and so forth. When you look at that raw data, I feel like we're losing. And I also feel like there's so many vulnerabilities, nobody can possibly take care of them all. So, and that's led to the ideas of prioritization and which vulnerabilities are used by the attackers, MITRE attack framework, what's the CISA's got the Kev, if it still exists in the next couple of weeks. Where do you fall on that? I mean, you've been in the vulnerability business for a long time. What's your view of the state of things?
I think where we went wrong is we started off with this model that everything is a funnel. You start off with all this stuff on one side, and you try to figure out what's more important, and you slowly move down towards the thing that should be actionable. And the reason you do that is because you have so much stuff that you need. Right. You only have so much effort you can spend on remediation, right? The challenge, though, is like the things that we're starting off with at the beginning of that funnel are wrong. Like most of the data is that's not even your full scope of vulnerabilities to start with. So number one, most of the fun vulnerabilities that I like exploiting have never had a CVE and will never get a CVE, and that's okay. It's a default credential, it's an open database, it's a misconfiguration. It's all that stuff out there that that's how people break into stuff all day long, and there'll never be a CVE for it. By contrast, you've got companies that have created a prioritization process that if the issue doesn't have a CVE, it never ends up on the board for them.
Right.
So if people are doing this massive amount of prioritization, funneling, and filtering work, only to miss the more serious vulnerabilities, which are the 0 days coming in, things like that. I mean, a lot of folks like to point to the CISA Kev, like, okay, if a vulnerability is being compromised and it's on the Kev, then I can take an action on it. My take is like, okay, you have to wait for the bear to eat 10 people first, then you're going to take action. No, like CISA Kev doesn't add to the Kev until weeks have gone by of exploitation.
Right.
If you're trying to follow the CISA Kev, you're far behind. Especially if you're a big target. If you're a Fortune 500 and you're waiting for the Kev to come around and tell you what to fix, you're already behind, right? You're already probably compromised through the same vulnerabilities.
I sort of share the a similar philosophy in terms of, and again, it's PCI centric, but PCI at the highest level has 6 goals, and one of the goals is implement a vulnerability management program, and that encompasses 2 requirements, 5 and 6, which were used to be the antivirus, but now is the anti-malware requirement, and then requirement 6 is where secure code development comes in, patching, having a risk ranking. No mention of a scanner. In fact, in version 4, it explicitly says you're not finding vulnerabilities to fix using a scanner. And yet, most organizations do that because the scan vendors have told them that's what vulnerability management is. Start with the scan. And I kind of feel like the same way. If you're waiting until it shows up in the scan, there's been this huge window where you've missed out.
Yeah.
Any way to retrain the world to think differently about that?
That's what we're trying to do. So our entire goal of the platform is we've collected so much data ahead of time that by the time some new burning tire fire vulnerability comes out, it's a search query away, it's not a scan away. So you're not having to go rescan your network or bring in integration data. Like the data's already there. So if you're looking for, let's say you hear in the news there's something called the Move It and it's being compromised and people are getting ransomware, that you can do a search in our product that second, find all your Move It instances and take care of them, whether there's a patch available or not. And that's kind of where we're moving. Most of our customers look at us as the hour 0 through first week response time of find every instance of that technology, mitigate it, put it behind whatever kind of controls you can possibly get to, isolate it, do whatever you need to do, and then you work with your kind of day-to-day vulnerability management on the backside. But we really focus on that first critical window where folks are getting compromised and ransomware.
Yeah, it's interesting because the requirements in 6 that require organizations to address critical vulnerabilities, it's in the context of apply patches that address critical vulnerabilities within 30 days of release of the patch. That's where I first got hung up on.
Assuming there's a patch.
If you're waiting, if there's a patch, waiting for the scanner. But for the 20 years that PCI has been around, that requirement is talked about having multiple sources of discovering vulnerabilities. Like in the old days, Bug Track and what did FWTK stand for? The Firewall Wizards Toolkit and various other places
Security
that we use
IDs,
I mean, I guess those exist still to these days to some degree, but I think most organizations are relying on the vendors being upfront and vendor notifications. Of course, the Windows world has relied on Patch Tuesday for who knows how long. Other than simply going out and getting your product, which is the ultimate goal, of course, are there ways that we're not thinking about that you can share to help organizations look for vulnerabilities, especially, as you said, the ones that aren't strictly vulnerabilities in code, vulnerabilities in systems and applications?
Yeah. Like I say, we built a product to do specifically this, but if you are not using a product like that, what you need is a fantastic inventory of all your stuff. You need to know what's externally exposed, what are the vendors, what are the technologies, and start just keyword matching that stuff. Some things in the news, you say, okay, I use Palo Alto firewalls, new Palo Alto firewall bug. I need to do something about that right now.
Right.
What we're seeing is a lot of vendors are telling their customers there's a new remote exploit in their SLVPN product, for example, on a Thursday afternoon, and they don't ship a patch till maybe next week. And they're like, have fun this weekend, guys. It's like, what do you want me to do? Like, I can't even get to my VPN without my VPN, so you can't even fix the damn thing. Sorry for the language, but
this is
we've seen
Security
firewall
Weekly at heart.
We've seen firewall vendors suggest you put another firewall in front of their firewall,
Right.
and that doesn't work, right? So you need to have a very good eye for what technology's on your edge. If you look at the more recent like M-Trends, Mandiant Report, things like that, so many of the compromises that they investigated were related to edge device exposure. So just knowing what's on your edge, keeping track of it, knowing where the vulnerabilities are, knowing that there probably won't be a patch for a week once a vulnerability's been actively exploited.
Right.
Like the Vanti stuff has been ridiculous for the last couple of years. That is where a lot of the breaches are happening right now. It's edge-facing equipment that probably shouldn't be there, and it's often the same vendors again and again, right? It's the same crowd showing up with the same vulnerabilities.
We talk about them week after week after week on the show.
If you're using a product that's made by one of these vendors that's constantly in the news, maybe time to find a different vendor.
Out of curiosity, one of the new things in PCI, finally, they won't call it this, but it's effectively an SBOM. Have an inventory of your software components, third-party risks, supply chain risks. Are you guys touching on that aspect of the vulnerability world as well?
Yeah, we kind of joke that we're like a network SBOM because we identify not just like individual devices and servers, but all the services, applications, libraries, components. Like we'll say, hey, this thing's running jQuery. It's got this component here. It's using this SL library.
Right.
We do behavioral fingerprinting of TLS stacks. So when the whole it's scary sounding OpenSL 3.0.0 bug came out a while back, we had to go figure out how to tell apart OpenSL 3 from OpenSL 1. And they're byte for byte compatible on the wire. It drove us crazy. We spent all weekend on it. We finally realized that if you half close the socket, OpenSL 3.0 will send back an alert, but SL1 will not. So we do that kind of fingerprinting, and that lets us say, okay, OpenSL is deprecated. Can we find OpenSL 1 in our environment? Yes. Same thing with like Java TLS stacks, Go TLS stacks. So we try to like not just identify banners and things like that, but like actively fingerprint different protocols so we can give you a great list of components that are out there in your environment.
I have time for one more quick question. How do you think we can help organizations and to some degree this whole industry get beyond the mindset of if I find vulnerabilities, I'm going to have to fix them. I'm much more content to have less findings.
I mean, because we put so much effort into, if you know about the vulnerability, you must fix it, or if it's on the CISA kev, I must respond to it. Like, we're not doing anyone any favors here. Like, if you're waiting, if you're using that type of criteria to determine your patch response, it's already behind
Too
the curve.
late.
Yeah, you're going to be in the next mandate report. Put it that way. And that's the challenge. You don't want to be the thing in the kev. You don't want to be the kev's data source.
I was going to say the only way most companies get it is they have a very bad day.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But if you don't know the space very well and you're like, okay, what do I fix? How do I do it? If you look at what the vendors tell you, they're going to tell you to do their critical risk rating vulnerability, not telling you that they're missing the other half of the exposures.
Right. We could keep talking, but unfortunately our time's up. I'm going to thank you, HD, for coming with us today. If you want to get more information about Run Zero, you can go to securityweekly.com/Run Zero RSAC. And for information about our whole program of broadcasting here this week, securityweekly.com/RSAC. We'll be back in a few minutes with the next episode. HD, thanks again.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been great.